going to have a discussion about mandatory spay and neuter. Let me read you some stats here. Did you know that every day in the United States, tens of thousands of puppies and kittens are born? Now compare this to the 11,000 human births each day. Now think about that. That means that for every person born in the United States, 15 puppies and 45 kittens are born. So you can see there can never be enough homes for all these pets. Now think about this. This is amazing. One unfixed female cat and her offspring can potentially be the source of more than 400,000 cats in 7 years. One female dog and her unfixed offspring can produce 67,000 puppies in 6 years. Our community has an overload of companion animals. Too many dogs and cats are not wanted anywhere by anybody, so they end up being neglected, abandoned, and dumped. They are treated as disposable items instead of living, breathing creatures. I mean, countless of these companion animals suffer or die of disease, starvation, being hit by a car. And you know what? The luckier ones end up in the animal shelter. But, maybe they're not so lucky to end up there. Listen to this. Millions of healthy dogs and cats, millions, are killed in shelters annually in the United States. Over 50% of the animals that enter the shelter gets euthanized. And in some shelters, actually I should say most shelters, 70 to 80% of the animals gets euthanized. So what does that mean? That means that if an animal enters a shelter, he has more likely a chance of being euthanized than being adopted out. Euthanized. That's an interesting word. We think we know what it means. We hear the word being used all the time. I remember when I was a young girl, my best friend in the entire world was my dog Sparky. And I remember that last day Sparky was with us. My mother told me that we had to put Sparky to sleep so she will no longer suffer. And she will then go to doggy heaven and be very happy. And she reassured me it had to be done. It was the right thing to do. Then growing up into a bigger little girl, I somehow figured out that we didn't put Sparky to sleep. We euthanized her. So believe it or not, 30 some odd years later, and just the other day, I looked up the word in Webster's dictionary. Euthanasia. The act or practice of killing or permitting the death of hopelessly sick or injured individuals as persons or domestic animals in a relatively painless way for reasons of mercy. So indeed, that's what we did with my best friend in the entire world, Sparky. But that's what we're not doing that in the shelters. We are not ending the lives of these animals because they are hopelessly sick or injured. This is not a mercy death. We are ending the lives of the animals because nobody wants them. There are too many of them. So by definition, we're not euthanizing them, we're killing them. This bothers me. I know this has to bother you. I know we humans, sensitive humans, don't want this to happen. I know we care about this, and I challenge anyone to offer me a good reason why we shouldn't do anything about it. So, how do we stop this senseless killing of these animals? By simply fixing them. If the solution is so easy, then why don't we do it? This is our fault. This is human beings' fault that these animals are being killed because we allow them to be bred, we allow them to reproduce by not fixing them. Don't we have a moral responsibility to do something about it? The way we treat animals reflects our own humanity. We are not taking responsibility for the problem we caused. We are killing them. We are allowing this to happen by not making it absolutely mandatory and required by law to stop this endless cycle of breeding and reproducing by fixing our companion animals. You know what? Unless something's done about it, thousands of dogs and cats are continue to be born in the United States while thousands of others are simultaneously being killed. In good conscience, we can no longer let this happen. And to paraphrase my next guest before I introduce him, we can no longer turn blind eyes and deaf ears to the silent cries of those who did not ask to be born, let alone ask to die. We're going to talk to Professor Henry Mark Holzer, the first animal rights lawyer and chairman of General Counsel for the International Society for Animal Rights. We're going to find out what needs to be done to stop the senseless killing. We're going to find out why pet owners of companion animals don't fix their pets. What are some of the deficiencies in current spay-neuter legislation? We're going to take your phone calls. This is K-News Radio. It's 13 minutes after the hour. I'm Dr. Lori Kirshner. You're listening to Animals Today.
Think what it would mean if I could talk to the animals.
This is Animals Today on K-News 970, 1140, 1250. Here is Dr. Lori Kirshner.
Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome, Henry Mark Holzer, Professor Emeritus, Brooklyn Law School, on the topic mandatory spay-neuter laws. Professor Holzer is a constitutional law scholar in addition to being regarded as the first animal lawyer in the United States. He's also the chairman of the International Society for Animal Rights, or ISAR. We invite you to join our conversation or ask Professor Holzer a question about mandatory spay-neuter laws here on Animals Today. The K-News Live line is open for your call. Toll free, dial 888-589-6397, or locally here in Palm Springs, you can reach us at 416-8475. Welcome, Dr. Holzer.
Glad to be here.
An ordinance requiring spay or neutering of animals was just passed in Riverside County. Do you think this is a step in the right direction?
Yes and no. And I'll explain why the answer is equivocal. I mean, essentially it's a sham because even animal control people in the county admitted that it was an effort to satisfy people who wanted a universal mandatory spay-neuter law. And the fact of the matter is that the only dogs that need to be sterilized are those whose owners let them run amok or roam unlicensed to bite people or violate state laws. In other words, only when pet owners show themselves, in the view of the county animal people, to be irresponsible, must they be spayed and neutered. So it's a sham in the sense that it's not going to prevent a lot of unwanted births, and it's not going to help reduce the overpopulation number of animals in this county. The only good thing you can say about it is that it's raised the consciousness of people about this problem and again underscored that something needs to be done. The risk of that, even of that, is that a lot of people can now contend that, we passed a mandatory spay-neuter ordinance, what else do you want from us?
Right.
So it's the same thing on a much smaller scale that happened in the California legislature last year when they had what purported to be a mandatory spay-neuter law, which happily didn't pass because it wasn't a mandatory spay-neuter law. It wasn't any kind of a spay-neuter law at all, actually. And what happened is essentially the breeders and the AKA, the American Kennel Club, AKC, American Kennel Club, killed it. And again, if it had passed, it would have been riddled with such loopholes that it would have been ineffective, but it would have enabled the opponents to say, well, we have a mandatory spay-neuter law, what else do you want from us? There's only one way to do this, and the way to do it is set forth in a model law that ISAR has prepared that's on our website, which is as strict and as enforceable as anything could be. It's the toughest law in the country, and it ought to be enacted everywhere.
Right, and I did read your proposal that you wrote, the model or statute for mandatory spay-neuter, and it's definitely not watered down with all these loopholes that communities can utilize. Has any legislators picked up on this and tried to implement it?
Not yet. It's almost brand new. It was published at the end of 2008, and a lot of volunteers who work for ISAR are now trying to get sympathetic legislators on a state level to enact it, and that's something I want to emphasize. Another problem with the Riverside ordinance is that it's a county. It's not even a city. It's not even the whole Coachella Valley. It's just the county of Riverside. These mandatory spay-neuter laws, in addition to being really mandatory, and for the details, they should go to the ISAR website, must be enacted on a state level. They cannot be enacted on a local level, and if enacted on a state level, they cannot allow the states to delegate to the localities how to implement these laws.
And do you think the world is just not even quite ready for this tough legislation?
Well, I don't know about the world, certainly not the world, but sadly, I don't think that the American people are ready for it. Mm-hmm. And that's because the existence of the problem evidences that more eloquently than anything could.
Right. So can you explain why we need what is a mandatory spay-neuter law, or just explain your proposed model, if you can, in a few minutes?
It's lengthy and legal. Having said that, I'll try to summarize it. In essence, Lori, what it does is it requires every dog and cat to be sterilized promptly after birth, after 4 months. And the only exceptions, unlike these other statutes which allow breeders basically to do whatever they want, the only exceptions are for limited births by people breeding dogs for a limited period of time, and no release of those type animals, dogs or cats, unless upon release, I don't mean release into the wild, to other people, to owners, custodians, they are spayed and neutered with very strict enforcement and very high fines beginning at $1,000. The essence of it is that any dog within, let's say, this state, or cat in this state, has to be spayed and neutered almost immediately, almost at the time they can breed, with very, very few exceptions.
And, I mean, I have no doubt that your proposed mandatory spay-neuter statute will be quite unpopular amongst the breeders.
Well, it will be, and it's the breeders basically who killed the legislation at the state level in California, and the breeders who were able to get the Riverside Ordinance watered down. They have a big vested interest in this, particularly puppy farms and
right.
kitten mills,
right.
which are among the worst violators. That's another aspect of this that we really can talk about and should talk about some other time, how to shut them down. But the ISAR draft model ordinance would, in effect, put breeders and puppy mills certainly out of business.
Right. Listen, we invite you to join our conversation. If you're just tuning in, I'm Dr. Lori Kirshner. You're listening to Animals Today on AM 970, 1140, 1250, K-News Radio. We're talking to Professor Holzer, chairman for the International Society for Animal Rights. Professor Holzer, is there any evidence that mandatory spay-neuter really works?
There's no question that it works. I mean, anybody who has ever neutered spay or neutered a pet animal knows that if the animal gets into a situation where, were it not altered, it could breed, it works. Right,
but do you know of any situations, any shelters or any cities or states that it tried absolute mandatory spay-neuter like you're proposing, and there was an effect?
Yes, actually, if ISAR published and it's on our website, I should mention this, published a monograph that I wrote, which is called The Policy, Law, and Morality of Mandatory Spay-Neuter. It's quite lengthy. It's on the website. It can be downloaded. It is chock full of examples of municipalities, counties, cities, small cities that have enacted mandatory spay-neuter legislation, and there's been a tremendous drop-off in stray animals and animals loading up into shelters. There's no question that it works.
Professor Holzer, why don't people fix their animals?
Well, I think fundamentally there are three reasons. One is, I think, ignorance of the costs of, and I don't mean financial costs, of not doing it, of animals causing, obviously through no fault of their own, causing disease, costing tremendous amounts of money for municipalities and states to deal with them. In other words, they just don't know the consequences and the ramifications of this enormous overpopulation problem. And equally, they don't know the benefits of mandatory spay-neuter and fixing all these animals. And finally, there's a tremendous ignorance of the moral aspects of this thing. which is a whole other subject, but needs to be mentioned. In other words, as you indicated in your opening remarks, this is a moral problem, a moral issue. These are living creatures.
Right.
They're being treated like inanimate objects. But that's, again, another subject. So that's one, the ignorance. The other is the indifference. Parents wanting to see have their children see the so-called miracle of birth. In New Mexico, where we lived for a long time, most male dogs and cats, for that matter, were not neutered because culturally a lot of people out there, a lot of men thought to neuter their dog and somehow diminished their own manhood, as bizarre as that may sound, but I think psychologists will tell you that it's a fact. And finally, an unwillingness, almost a political correctness, unwillingness to recognize that, and our monograph has statistics on this, that roughly 3% of the population causes 80% of the overpopulation.
Explain
of
that.
Dogs and cats. Well, the lower reaches of the economic scale, either because they're stupid, or they don't care, or they can't afford it, or they're indifferent, or whatever.
Yeah, you mentioned a good point. That's so true, and personal experience with it. My closest friend who lives on the East Coast, I mean, she has a dog, and she is going to let her dog, well, not anymore after talking to her, but she was planning to let her dog have puppies for the reason so her 4-year-old child could see the miracle of birth.
Right. Well, what you ought to do is get impregnated by her husband or boyfriend, and 9 months later take her child to the maternity ward and watch her deliver. That'd make a whole lot more sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it sure would. It sure would. Okay, let's talk about, from an economic standpoint, okay, some would argue that a state implementing a mandatory spay-neuter plan would cost the state millions of dollars annually. So explain how a community fixing their animals good use of taxpayer dollars.
Again, I advert to the monograph because we've covered this in detail. The fact of the matter is that it costs countless millions of dollars a year, and maybe even more than that, nationally, to deal with this overpopulation problem. From an economic perspective, the financial costs of euthanasia are huge. By some estimates, and we have a reference to this too, a footnote reference to it, $500 million a year. Some people have estimated, and these are serious people who've studied this issue in detail, some have estimated the cost between $1 billion and $2 billion to house, feed, kill, and dispose of unwanted companion animals. And the fact is that the average cost for a shelter in the United States to house just 4 kittens a couple of years ago was estimated at $704.
Yeah, excellent point. I'm glad you made it. It's about 13 after the hour. Animals Today continues on AM 970, 1140, 1250, K-News Radio, and online at knewsradio.com. We're talking with Professor Henry Holzer about mandatory spay-neuter.
From the smallest critters to the biggest living creatures. You're listening to Animals Today with Dr. Lori Kirshner on the Desert's News Talk Superstation AM 970, 1140, 1250 K-News Radio. Live from Palm Springs, here's Dr. Kirshner.
We are speaking to Professor Holzer, Chairman for the International Society for Animal Rights, and we're talking about mandatory spay-neuter laws. Your participation is welcome. If you have a question or comment for our guest, call us locally here in Palm Springs, 416-8475, or from anywhere, toll-free number is 888-589-6397. Professor Holzer, just going back to a couple things you said earlier, some may argue that their dog is their property and they have a right to do with it as they want. How would you respond to that?
Well, the first thing you'd have to do is ask them why they believe that. It's simply not enough for somebody to make a statement.
Well, what if they say they have a right to not fix their pet if they don't want to, and And why should the government force them to fix their pet?
Well, it's the same question. Again, that's not a reason. It's simply an assertion. But let's assume that that's the answer that they give.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look, you have to get a license before you can sell ice cream. The government has the power, rightly or wrongly, to regulate virtually every facet of its citizens' lives. And we're not dealing here with anything that's dangerous. In other words, the government can argue, although unsuccessfully lately, that people shouldn't have guns because they can kill other people. We're talking here about living, breathing, sentient creatures that can experience pain, etc. So just as there's no right, in quotes, to do all sorts of things in this country today, there is no right, nobody can find one anywhere, so to speak, that you can do anything you want to an animal. Look, there are anti-cruelty laws. There are laws that say you have to feed animals, you have to house them, you have to give them medical care. There's all sorts of laws regarding animals having to do with even the slaughter of animals. So it is no extension by any means to tell a custodian of a pet animal, a companion animal, that they have to have it spayed and neutered so it doesn't reproduce willy-nilly.
It makes so much sense with all the reasons you've given. Why don't we enforce this? Why don't we make it absolutely mandatory?
Well, it's as I said, the reasons that people don't do it are translated into legislation or their legislative representatives, and they don't take it seriously. As you said a moment ago, people assert a right, and they don't bother to explain what that right is rooted in, that they can deal with a living creature any way they like, including killing it if they want, eating it for dinner. And legislators are simply representatives of these kind of people.
Right.
And a lot of them, as I said, don't take it seriously. A lot of them don't understand the issue. A lot of them don't care about the morality. They don't understand the economics. And and there hasn't been enough of a groundswell, frankly. How many organizations are out there beating the bushes for not just spay-neuter, which a lot of people do voluntarily, but mandatory spay-neuter with teeth in it? And how many legislators are out there willing and able even to oppose these breeder organizations? The American Kennel Club is one of the worst offenders of the overabundance, the overpopulation of companion animals, because they give, quote, papers, quote, to owners, and they give papers to animals coming out of puppy mills, which simply exacerbates the problem. But who's going to take on the American Kennel Club? ISAR has been trying to do it for years, but they're a huge organization with a lot of money and good lobbyists and muscle, legal muscle, economic muscle, public relations muscle. And unless there's some enormous groundswell from the public enacting these mandatory spay-neuter laws, such as the one we propose, is not going to be easy, as history has demonstrated.
Right. In my experience, and you touched on this, I think ignorance is a big factor why people don't fix their animals. Knowing, I can't tell you how many individuals I express that how many animals we kill in our local shelters every day. Every day. They don't believe it. They don't know it. Oh, really? You kill animals in the shelter?
It's a revolving door, as you suggested in your opening remarks. They get born, and the door starts turning, and when it gets right back where it started, many of them, if not most of them, are killed in shelters.
Right. And they'll say, well, maybe they're not healthy, or maybe they're not domesticatable, or maybe they're vicious. Well, it's so untrue.
Or maybe I want to watch a sitcom.
Right, exactly.
And not think about this.
That's right.
But movements are a long time aborning. the anti-slavery movement, the civil rights movement, all of these things.
Women to vote movement.
There was no, women's suffrage. There was no such thing, as you kindly said at the beginning, as animal rights law until 25 years ago, when I convened the first meeting of people. Isar and I convened the first meeting of people, lawyers who were interested in this subject, a few from here and a few from there. And now it's a burgeoning movement, and that's what's going to change this.
So,
the fact that there are law students and lawyers now out there practicing animal law, and animal law is taught in almost every law school in America now.
So do you predict in my lifetime, I'm 44, in my lifetime, that I will see a day when animals are not killed in our shelters and all animals are fixed and there's not an overabundance of animals, unwanted animals?
No. But what you will see, I hope, is that there's far fewer of them. People's priorities, Laurie, are different.
Yeah. And our goal is to try to change those priorities.
That's right, and that's why our efforts at ISAR are devoted to humane education, emphasizing spay-neuter, mandatory spay-neuter.
Yeah.
The next monograph, by the way, which is in the works now, is about puppy farms and how to put puppy farms out of business.
I'm going to look forward to reading that. Other than the obvious benefit that spay-neuter will help with the overpopulation problem, I know there are other health and behavioral issue benefits to spay-neutering that maybe people aren't aware of. Do you know of these, and can you state them? Well,
I mean, Dr. Borschelt will be able to address that much better than I, but there is simply no question that the consequences of spay-neuter are many and very, very important. I mean, aggressiveness is taken out of males, and spraying is taken out of males, and disease is spread by strays and feral animals, as you know.
Decreased risk of ovarian cancer
and
other...
I mean, as to the animal itself, yes, certainly. I mean, it's a beneficial procedure for the animal, but existentially, as far as others are concerned.
Right.
Society, children, I mean, there's no question about it.
Less likely to roam, less likely to dig, less likely to wander. I heard a statistic, I'm not sure if this is true, but I heard that when you're driving, you see a dog dead on the side of the road, it's usually 8 out of 10 a male dog because they're unfixed and they're out to search for an unfixed female. Is that?
Yes. Yeah, well, the scent, as you know, travels far and wide. And you know, people say, oh, well, the dog got out of the yard. You know,
right?
And so it roams. It gets hit by a car, or it doesn't get hit by a car, and runs across a road. Somebody swerves, and maybe somebody gets killed. Not just the animal.
Right.
I mean, there's no question about it. There's no argument to be made to keep companion animals intact.
Completely.
There is no
agree.
argument.
Right.
I mean, there are arguments to be made. There is no winning argument. There is no sustainable argument to keep them intact. And well, we have to breed them. We want to have best of show. Too bad.
And it just amazes me that it's just, if there's no argument, why isn't it done?
Look how big the Westminster Dog Show is, and it's covered on television, right. And even here in the Coachella Valley, they had a cat show, I think, not long ago, and they keep these animals in cages, and they take them out and show them like these moronic adults do with their little girls, and dress them up like Hollywood stars. I mean, these companion animals are not inanimate objects. They're not furniture.
Absolutely, and you know, also in your statute, I remember reading that some people may say, I know you promote early spay-neuter, like as early as 3 months, yeah. And some would say, you know, fixing my dog or cat earlier than 6 months could be dangerous, which is a controversial issue. But I'll tell you, since I read your statute, I spoke to 3 different veterinarians, all which have said it's earlier is better.
Absolutely.
3 months makes no difference in 6 months, and this dangerous controversy is nothing.
Well, it's another argument, you see, made by the people who want to breed, that it's unhealthy to the animal to do it early. And what they're doing is look, time is on their side in the sense that the longer the animal is not fixed, the more opportunity it is to have more animals.
Right.
This is you can hear my voice. This is a moral issue ultimately. If the morality were different, we wouldn't have to be talking about what the statute should say or how early you do it or whether it should be every animal should be microchipped for identification, etc. We wouldn't be talking about that if people understood the moral issue here. And it all goes back, and this is in my monograph. I explain it at length. It all goes back to a French philosopher named Descartes, who held that since animals, in his view, didn't have souls, they were, in his words and his followers, mere automaton. In other words, lacking souls, they were like machines. And that justified his and his followers vivisecting them. Now, vivisection doesn't mean experimentation. Vivisection, is live.
Yeah. It's sickening.
They dissected live animals.
It's sickening.
Because they were like machines in that they lacked souls. And many of the people who cause these problems are Cartesians, and they don't even know it. You listen in sometime to the switchboard at a shelter and listen to the reasons given by people who want to dump their animals. All you have to do is substitute the word dog or cat or Sparky or whatever, or Fido, for my car or my TV set or my mattress.
It's sickening. You're absolutely right. Hopefully, we will be able to change the world sooner than later. Professor Holzer, I want to thank you so much. We're running out of time. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Professor Holzer, regarded as the first animal lawyer in the United States. He's also the chairman of International Society for Animal Rights, or ISAR.